International Writers' Day, March 3rd, 2023. The members of the Yerevan Literary Club of Yerevan, Armenia, are celebrating the launch of their anthology of short fiction, A Drop in the Sea, a book that I had the privilege of helping to edit. The Yerevan Literary Club was founded in 2011. Karayan means railway station in Armenian. The Yerevan group soon began to publish a yearbook and then a quarterly, and now the present volume. From my desk in Holliston, Massachusetts, I send warm wishes and congratulations. I hope to see some of you when I visit Yerevan in June. A Drop in the Sea will undoubtedly help to further the club's mission of cultivating, promoting, and disseminating contemporary Armenian literary prose. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to play a small part. As I reread these stories now in book form, I am struck by their complex rendering of the human condition and by the author's focus on issues at the crux of global literary culture today: creativity, critical thinking, and human rights in the multi-layered context of war and peace, artistic freedom and political repression, empire and national autonomy, gender and sexual violence, and the weight and permanence of history versus the ephemerality and dislocation of contemporary digital culture. Armenia itself is a multi-layered country, a palimpsest of empire. As Susanna Harutyunyan suggests at the end of her story, God has passed through here. When the Europeans came, they were naive because they didn't know that the Russians had been there before them. The Russians, who'd come before the Europeans, came after the Ottomans. The Persians, who'd come before the Ottomans, knew that before them and after the Seljuks came the Tatars and the Mongols, and before that the Arabs, who came, it seems, after the Greeks. They'd come at the same time as the Egyptians before the Romans, who had come before the Byzantines, who came after the Assyrians, who came after the Kuris. But even before that, Noah had passed through here, and he had stopped because God himself had passed through this place. And Noah was the only one who left something instead of taking something away. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to know that God had passed through here, and then the Europeans wouldn't have come. There is a train station in Yerevan which has been locked since the collapse of the USSR. Georg Tel Gabrelyan, an author and co-editor of this volume, informs me that for many years it was dysfunctional, and for a few years now it had only one connection with the outside world, to neighboring Georgia. In fact, there are very few trains that connect to places in Armenia, an apt metaphor, I think, this time and place, this abandoned world inhabited by ghosts of the past. And then again there are dreamscapes of possibility, cultural intersections and connections, terrifying dead ends, and hope itself shattered by war and dissolution. A Drop in the Sea, however, seems to suggest a rising from the ashes, a resurrection and rebirth. The collection opens with two stories by Lucine Karatyan: America Place from 9/11 to 11/9, America Place Pregnant from the series America Place, and the Manas. America Place, a numbered series of astringent vignettes, portrays contemporary American culture through the eyes of an Armenian foreign exchange student residing with a Midwestern Protestant Republican family. In the Manas, Karatyan recounts the story of Arpin, an Armenian woman visiting Bishkek, the capital city of Kyrgyzstan, near the Kazakhstan-Kyrgyzstan border. In her travels and border crossings, Arpin carries her national history with her, a traumatic history shot through with organized pogroms and weaponized sexual violence that cause her to see the world darkly through a kind of veil. In Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Armin of Armenia experiments with structure and narrative form by modeling his story on the most popular television game show in history. Again, Armin uses this device to build reader interaction into the story, as well as an element of randomness via the multiple-choice format. Here, the narrator himself emerges as the central character, a disembodied, sometimes snarky voice floating somewhere in cyberspace with secrets, both sinister and funny, to reveal and conceal. Armin's Silver Gate, which has its premiere in this volume, is a historically rich and resonant tale, a set of intricately nested stories, in fact, that take place in the mid-1980s Armenia in general and Yerevan Children's Sanatorium in particular. Silver Gate unfolds at the time of the nuclear catastrophe in Chernobyl and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Like other stories in this collection, Silver Gate has a valuable micro-historical dimension, mapping the jagged social, cultural, and political terrain in the late Soviet era, with a focus, at once realistic and magical, on everyday life. Mayor Israelian's charming tale, Unimaginable Cheesies for Jeff Bronson, is set in the Brussels American School in Belgium. Cheesy was a child-friendly and American-friendly term for khachapuri, or cheese bread, a traditional food that David's mother bakes from a recipe passed on by Grandma Vardosh to her granddaughter. The secret recipe had been delivered from Alashkert, an Armenian historic town in Turkey, to Tbilisi, Georgia, surviving for a century and ending up as the specialty in the kitchen of an Armenian family that had settled in the heart of Europe. Such are the vagaries of cultural transmission Israelian seems to suggest. Jeff, the Wisconsin Bear Bronson, a 400-pound gay kindergarten teacher with a heart of gold, befriends the 5-year-old David, a little boy, after all, in unfamiliar surroundings, with an indecipherable language and nobody to play with. A Drop in the Sea includes 3 brief pieces by Varam Martirosyan and also excerpts from his novel Cotton Walls. The contrast between Martirosyan's dreamlike miniatures and his more realistic novel illustrates a fundamental and telling tension in this collection between storytelling anchored firmly in history, narratives carrying the weight of the past, and storytelling that unfolds in dream time, mythic time, or the eternal present. While Memory Full explores the creative process, The Fish is an iridescent lyrical fable that seems to reimagine folk tales from the region, capturing their cadence and resonance. In Cotton Walls, a student protest novel, Martirosyan presents the life of youth in Soviet Armenia during the era of stagnation, the period between 1964 and 1985. The plot of the novel turns in part on a top-secret decree by the USSR's Minister of Enlightenment, according to which the professional subjects in the higher education institutions of all the republics must switch over to the Russian language. Significant is the interaction between Georgian and Armenian students depicted in this piece, and the fact that both groups are anti-Soviet and pro-nationalist, with the implication that they need to be careful not to sow the seeds of future discord between their nations as well. Lilit Karapetyan's haunting and enigmatic story, Before Sunrise, is a fluid and imagistic piece that layers vivid and elusive word pictures freely associated with the narrator's visit to Kars, a city in northeast Turkey. Kars has an important and complex role within Armenian history, both ancient and modern. In Karapetyan's Nocturne, set in the AIDS epidemic of the late 20th century, the city seems forbidding and corrupt, hopelessly locked in a cycle of decay and rebirth. The story is very close to a prose poem with its lyricism, ambiguity, layered imagery, and deft decentering. Rak Beglaryan's 2 contributions to this volume, The Oak and the Nail and Waiting for the General, unfold in mythic time and allegorical space, and yet touch on the very real legacies in contemporary Armenian culture and society, environmental degradation and environmental stewardship, war, political patronage, and militarism. While The Oak and the Nail tells the story of the conflict and interdependency of nature and culture from the point of view of a hyper-sentient oak tree, Waiting for the General closely documents the situation after the First Karabakh War. The wartime fraternity is undermined by the greed and corruption of the careerists, as is typical for post-war societies. Susanna Haratunyan's 5 stories are rendered in richly detailed prose that immerse the reader in modern Armenian history. the Soviet era, the time of the First War with Azerbaijan, 1990s, and into the new millennium. Grandfather's Death Act in My Act explores the effects of death, the passage of time, and the dissonance and harmony between traditional and contemporary cultures. God Has Passed Through Here is a modern allegory about a beautiful, strangely luminescent girl, Nome, who lives with her family in a village hidden in a hollow at the top of a mountain. European scientists seek her out to investigate this phenomenon, persuading her parents to sell her body to science. In the contours of the story, the reader discovers a critique of Western colonialism and paternalism in the name of science, as well as the high cost of intentional and unintentional naivete of the poor. In A Red-Crested Dawn, Harutyunyan offers readers a glimpse of everyday life in an Armenian village through the eyes of Teresa, a woman somehow caught in a web of rural culture and kinship and unable to stop the relentless passage of time. The sun is the face of the Lord, and we behold it every day is an astonishing and macabre story about magnetic sexuality crushed by the relentless destruction of wartime. The Mighty End, a tale steeped in black humor, captures a mother and daughter confronting and avoiding end-of-life issues in a story with the light touch of a well-wrought situation comedy. In House of Horror, Harutyunyan offers a fractured Gothic fairy tale about materialism, superstition, and the importance of confronting one's own fears. A Drop in the Sea concludes with Gevorg Ter-Gabrielyan's complex work of closet cinema, a film that unfolds in the reader's imagination, the godless movie theater. The screenplay is set in Yerevan from about the 1930s to the mid-1950s. The Godless Movie Theater is a work of life fiction, blending documentary realism and legend. The scenes, he notes, are mostly based on actual events, stories, or on things that I've heard over the years. However, I've built the plot fictional to a certain extent, but on the other hand woven into legend, and the incidents are neither accurate from a factual point of view nor strictly chronological. Although the piece is most definitely filmic in structure, including flashbacks, montages, parallelism, and cross-dissolves, in this viewer's mental screening at least, we might also think of this piece as an album of vintage postcards from old Yerevan. Importantly, Ter-Gabrielyan documents the situation of artists in Soviet Armenia during the Stalinist purges of intelligentsia in 1936 to 1938 and beyond. That legacy, sadly, was quite enduring. A Drop in the Sea is not intended to be representative of contemporary Armenian literary prose as a whole, the authors assure us. After all, they are members of a particular literary society, the Karayan Literary Club, and yet the themes and characteristics that emerge in this collection are somehow representative. The long history of trauma and genocide in Armenian history, the culture of violence, a legacy of empire and militarism, the post-colonial contours of everyday life in contemporary Armenia, multi-ethnicity and transnationalism, the long shadow of Soviet oppression and repression, the tensions between folkloric traditions and modernity, the country and the city, folk wisdom versus the technocratic state, abiding faith versus atheism, sincerity and betrayal, the home front and the front lines, and the blurring of historical time and mythic time, a trace of transcendentalism or indigenous magic, perhaps. The writing collected here is somehow both ancient and modern, universal yet culturally and historically specific, its lines often rendered with philological precision or shimmering lyricism. In each drop, we may glimpse an entire ocean of literary possibility.